So we need to remove the photo etch from the fret that holds it all there. My preference is to use a modified knife blade for this. So this is a number 11 knife blade that has had the tip broken off, and what I've done is then turn that into a chisel tip using a blade sharpener, just to give us a flat edge. That means I can go down directly above where we need to cut and cut it nice and cleanly. If you don't have a chisel tipped blade, then you can do it with a round blade, like a curved blade, something like this, and just sort of roll it over. What you don't want to do is use an ordinary blade and drag it, because you can twist that and deform the photo etch. So we need to make sure that we cut it out without deforming the part. So the other thing you could do is you could actually cut through this with scissors. So if you cut this in half, you could trim it off with scissors and then take your parts off with the scissors. You can see there's quite a length of tab between the part and the fret, so you've got plenty of space to get in there with tweezers. So we're carefully going to remove our parts like so. I'm just going to trim the nub off there. If you need to remove the tabs off the end, then you can always sand it with a medium or fairly low grit sanding stick, but just be careful, because these are very delicate parts and they're quite thin, so slow actions and you can tidy that up. So yeah, what you need to do is remove the parts and make sure you've not lost which numbers are which, but you'll pretty much work that out. Longest to the bottom, shortest at the top. So I'm going to remove all of these now, and then we can get ready to glue them into place, and then we can complete our painting. The reason why we don't put these on right at the start when we're starting our process of painting is we don't want to lose all the definition of the detail on the hinge, the bolts and what have you. So that's why we're putting it on towards the end of our painting process, when you've only got like 2 or 3 left. Now the instructions have us painting these in white. You might want to pick them out in black so that you can see them. That's quite something that I see modelers do quite commonly. In this instance, I'm going to paint these in the white. Now, because these are metal, some people might think we need to prime these. Depends on your paint system, but if you are going to prime them, use a white primer, because what we don't want to do is put something like a grey down that's going to take lots and lots of coats to cover it. So I'm going to carry on taking these out, and then I'll get back to you when we're ready to glue them on. So the best way forward with putting these hinges on is to start with our rudder, because the rudder has got some nice engraving to show us the locations, and then we can put the rudder into the hull, and that we can then use for lining up the hinges. So let's start with the rudder. So when you look at the hinges, there is a thick end, and then you've got the two bolts. We want the thick end to be against this inside edge, not the outside edge. So we're going to need a little bit of medium CA for this job. I'm just going to get some tweezers. And it's a very straightforward process, really. A small amount of CA on the back of our part there. Line it up carefully with the marked out positions. Make sure it's straight and in the line. Simple as that. There we go. Last one on this side. Now what you have to remember when we come to glue the ones on the hull is that they're not in a straight line to what we're putting on the rudder. There's a drop down. So the hinges, the way they work is your metal piece of the hinge on the hull will be lower than the rudder. So the rudder sort of dropped into place. So this hinge, for example, will be there on the hull, just slightly lower than that. But you can see how putting these onto the rudder now, that allows us to line up what we want to do on the hull where we've not got really much in the way of guidance. So I'm going to put these on the other side and then I'll come back to you when we're doing the ones on the hull. So first thing I want you to do is, just before you install the hinges on the hull, is just put them into place and see if there's any bending needed to be done. Make sure you're happy, you know how you're going to fit them, and then there is some lines there, but they might have been covered up a little bit with the paint, so just check where the lines are and orientate yourself and make sure they're going in that direction, and then we can glue them in exactly the same way. So carefully lining up. This is a bit tricky for me because I have the hull in the wrong position really because of the camera. So I can just about make out my line, but I'm also just checking the orientation against the rudder there. And there we go, that's on. So as you get a little bit further up, you might have a slight lip there. Just make sure it's folded around that lip. And you're good to go. So that one's going to go on there like that. So just making sure that conforms to the shape. Right, you get the idea, so I'm going to carry on doing this off camera, and then once you've done this, carry on with your painting process. painting these in, and then when you're happy that it's all painted and everything's nice and even, we are ready to move on to the next stage of our build, which will be taking the masking off. So we are on step 49, and that is putting this permanently in place. So the instructions tell you to water down some wood glue, paint it on the back and put this into place. I'm not going to water down the glue, to be honest. I don't see that there's a particular need to do that. What I am doing though is just test fitting and making sure this fits okay, and you can see there is a slight gap for me. Now that is, it's catching on this edge here, so as I push it in, it can't go any further up. So to solve that problem, just going to take put a chamfer on here so that it fits naturally. Because it's got a squared off edge, it's not going to fit comfortably. So that's the first thing we're going to do, is just put a nice chamfer on the back there. Along the full length. And that hopefully should make it sit better. Okay, let's have a look. There. Yeah, that's immediately a lot better. You can see we've closed that gap now. Yeah, happy with that. So we can now glue that into place. So we'll put a little bit of glue on here. I'm not putting it onto here because this is actually slightly wider and we will have to trim that down, but so if I put it on here, I've only put glue on surfaces that are going to be in contact. Okay, and obviously we need to clamp this into place, so I've got clamps at the ready. You do have to be careful. The clamps will move it if you're not careful. There we go. 1. 2. I think that should do it, but what I'm going to do is just put a couple on the end just to make sure it's nice and tightly buttered up. Just keep that down. I think it's in contact, but it's not going to do any harm. There we go. So we'll leave that to dry and then we can look at our next step. So if you've not built up the cradle yet, now's the time to do that. And then that takes you to step 51. And what you want to do is get these formed under the steamer and then we can paint them. Before we remove the draft marks, I want to prepare for painting them, and the easiest way I found for painting small photo etch parts like that is to put them on a little bit of flat tape. That makes it easy to handle them without having to handle them, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do is going to wrap a little bit of masking tape with the sticky side facing out around this lollipop stick. So you can buy bags of 100 of these for next to nothing in craft shops, and I use them for all sorts of things, for painting all sorts of things I should say. So there we go, that's the first one done. I might need two, so I'll prep two. There you go, and it's quite sticky, so I can put it down and it's not gonna move. So that's the first one. I'm gonna do another one and then we'll look at removing the photo etch. Right, we have our painting sticks sorted. So the next thing is to remove the photo etch part. So we've got the draft marks here, and then we've got this bracket which bolts two heavy duty pieces of wood together, and then we have the lucky horseshoe. So I'm going to start by removing the lucky horseshoe using my modified blade that I use for photo etch removing. Now the instructions tell us that we need to paint these copper. You've got a couple of different options here actually. We'll talk about that in a minute when we get to painting. And when you've taken it out, just check that you've got it nice and flush, and if not, you can always give it a gentle sand using a fairly a medium to fine grit is where you want to be. There we go, that feels better. And then we can put that on our paint stick. There you go, and that'll sit there nicely now while we paint it all up, and then you can easily remove it. You just get a knife underneath and pull it off when we're ready to glue it into place. So I'm going to remove all of this photo etch in the same way. Just be careful that you don't bend any of these draft marks as you remove them. The way to go is just do it one at a time, nice and carefully. Make sure you're nice and tight up against the edge of the photo etch. Turn the photo etch around, make sure you're comfortable with how you're cutting it. You can see the part and so on. There we go. That one's not coming off. Maybe I cut the other one on the other side. Yeah, I think I did. Right. There we go. And then you can just put that on your paint stick ready to go. It's the same on both sides, so it doesn't matter which way round you put it on. There's no right or wrong way. So I'm going to carry on, get all these done, and then I'll come back to you. Right, time to paint all these brass bits and pieces. And rather than putting an acrylic primer on, we're going to put an enamel paint on. Reason being is this is thinner, and so we're not going to clog up any of the detail using this, whereas an acrylic primer tends to be a fair bit more viscous, and that could cause you clogging issues if, like me, you're brush painting. Now, if you've got an airbrush and you've got the skills, by all means airbrush this. It's probably the best way to go, but because we're doing this as an absolute beginner's build, and that could be an absolute beginner to modelling, not just wooden ship modelling, then we're brush painting and assuming you don't have an expensive piece of kit like an airbrush. So the way to do it is a very small amount of paint on your brush. Don't overload it. You don't want to be flooding the detail. And then we're just going to gently paint it on, making sure we're going over the edges. Now, we don't have to have this look nice. This is a base coat. We're going to paint on the top of it. So it doesn't matter if it looks a little bit scrappy, all this is going to do is key the next coat of paint, which of course will be the copper colour that the instructions are calling for. But do go over the edges. You don't want to be able to see any of the brass. There we go. So the key is to not have too much paint on your brush. If you've got too much paint on your brush, you're going to flood the part, and you don't want to do that. If you think you've got too much on, just give it a wipe on a tissue, take it off, and just very gently put it on. It's not a difficult process. There we go. So I'm going to carry on doing that on all the parts. When I've finished, I'm going to turn my hand to painting the whales. So again, using the Humbrol 33 black enamel, we can paint that straight on. It sinks in quite fast, it dries quite fast. So we can pre-paint that and make sure that we're in a good position, ready to glue this into place. We will have to do a little bit of touch up, but that'll be fine. So all of my photo etch items are dry, and they were left overnight, and now we can paint them in the copper. Now there's several different ways you can go here. Some people like to paint them black, which isn't really authentic. Painting them copper is much more authentic to how they would have been originally put on the ship, and if you're doing sort of a museum standard, that's the way to go. If you're wanting to show the ship a little bit more aged and used, then you can put a green tint to them, make it a dark copper, give them a washing in green to show some oxidization. There's various different ways of doing it. For the purposes of the beginner's build, we're not doing any weathering or anything like that at all on this. So I'm just going to paint them straight copper. And again, we've got multiple ways of going. You can paint them in the same way as we did with the black enamel and paint them in copper. Be very careful not to fill out the detail with the paint. So make sure there's not too much paint on your brush. Even take a bit off if you need to, and gently paint it in. Or you could do what I'm doing. I'm going to use a paint marker, and that's going to be a lot less messy for me and quicker, and hopefully should look just as good. So let's see how we get on. Make sure the paint's flowing, and put my magnifying glasses on because I can't see anything this small these days. So the reason why we painted in black is because that helps with the metallic look. There we go. This is working well. I may choose to go with 2 coats eventually. We will see, but this is acrylic paint that we're putting on with the pen, and it should dry fairly quickly. So by the time we've got to the end of the first coat, we can probably come back and do second coats if we decide that's what we're going to do, and I think I've already made that decision, and I think we will be doing. The advantage of things like paint pens, paint marker pens, is you've got the ability to do some precision work really quickly without worrying about having to, without worrying about losing detail. So you can see how quickly this is going on. You can see how that's going to need a second coat. Okay, I'll come back to you when I've finished this job. So with our transom piece now glued in, we need to sort out the edge. We've got a slight overhang here and we need it to be flush with the side of the ship. So that's a simple task, but we do have to do it very carefully because we don't want to lose any of the lovely lasered detail on here. So we're simply going to take this down with a file until it's flush, and as soon as you can see it's starting to affect this, you're sort of done. You can stop at that point. Nearly there. And we've got a little bit of laser scorching here. Now this bit is about level with that, and we're going to have the whale go over this little bit here, but we want to make sure none of that laser scoring is visible. It's not attractive. So I'm just going to take that back a little bit. There we go. You can always go in with a little bit of wet and dry if you want to sort it out. So when you're happy that you've got this level, next thing you want to do is get a little bit of very, very fine sandpaper or wet and dry. Right, with a very fine piece of wet and dry, we're just going to take the hard 90 degrees corner off the edge of this. So just a couple of passes right on the edge there, just to round it off a little bit. I personally think it looks more authentic, and it takes away that look of it being a laser cut part and turns it into part of the ship a little bit. I'm just going to finish the top surface and make sure that's nice and smooth, and blend it in to the side of the ship there. Ultimately, we want this to all look like it's all one thing and not separate parts, is what we're trying to achieve here. Then when you've finished sanding, just unclog the laser cut detail with the tip of a knife blade. Get all that sanding dust and what have you out. And then if you like, you can follow that line and finish it over the edge of your piece that you've just glued in. So you can just follow that line, and that will make it look like the plank is on the top. If you're not sure, don't. You don't want to ruin anything, but just continuing that line with the blade of your knife will just help it look a little bit more in keeping. So once you've gone over it a few times with the point of your knife, just turn the knife around so you're using the back edge, which is a bit wider, and drag it through, and that should continue your line across the end of that, and that just makes it look a little bit more authentic. So that's just a little tip. You'll actually find that the laser lines don't go all the way at the top. I'm not sure why that is. We can always extend that later on if we feel there's a need to do that. But yeah, there we go. That is that all prepared, ready for putting the whale on. Adding the whales now. As per the instructions, we've pre-painted and we have pre-shaped. That allows you to fit it easier. So I've used the steam method to do that. I've pre-painted on the basis that we'll probably give a final coat on top once it's been glued into place. I'm using the CA gel that we've used for some of the top planking. I'm not using nails because there's a high risk that those nails will bend when you try and put them through. So and it creates the extra work of cutting the head off, hammering them home, sanding and possibly sanding and filling if that's what you feel is needed. So with this method, we're just gonna clip it on. Now, a lot of this is sitting below the deck line, so you're gonna need bigger clamps that you can angle down, but we should be able to use some of these at the bow particularly. So first one, I'm gonna put this into place. I've only put glue on a small area, so I'll put some more glue on as we go. See, that's already come up, hasn't it? There we go, clip that down. I'm going to put a bigger clip on the front there just to make sure it's nice and tightly clamped. What you have to look out for and make sure it doesn't happen, if you put the clamp on the bottom, it can drag this up, and we need to make sure that it's aligned as per the instructions with the little bottom engraved line. There we go, that's sitting quite nicely now. So I can carry on gluing this into place. It's a little difficult to do this on camera because I would change the angle if I didn't have the camera on, but because you need to see what's going on, I have to sort of do it slightly differently, right? I'm going to put glue along the rest of the length now because it should be fairly straightforward to put this into place. See, I'm getting glue on the top edge because my angle's wrong. So I can simply blame you lot for that. So make sure we've got good coverage of glue. There we go. So it's just pinching it down at the top, and that's all we need. So I'm carefully putting it into place, making sure it's aligned. Inevitably you're going to get some scuffing from the clamps, so that's why we're going to end up doing another top coat. There we go. So that's into place. Got a little bit of glue there I want to get rid of. So there you go, that's our whale clamped on. Just leave that for a moment or two to make doubly sure that the glue is dried, although it probably already has now. So with our whales now in place, what we can do is just go over the top and give it another coat of paint just to smarten it up and give it a fresh look, and then we're ready to move on and start installing our photo etch parts on the hull. Okay, we need to remove the now painted and dried copper parts that we're going to be putting on, and the simple way to remove them is to just put your knife blade underneath and gently dislodge them from their masking tape like so. And then we're going to put them on with a tiny amount of CA glue. So I'm going to remove all these so they're ready to glue on, and then when that's done and ready and we're ready to install them, I'll come back to you. Okay, I have got all my photo etch parts off the tape and ready to be placed. So we're going to do that with some small tweezers. The key here is just a tiny amount of CA glue when you're placing the parts. Your hull is marked out with the positions of all of the parts that we're going to be placing. I'm going to start with one of the horseshoes. I'm using medium CA for this. It's just my preference. You could probably use thin. So I'm going to put a tiny amount in a couple of places. I mean, we're just wanting to hold it on really. There we go, spreading it out a little bit. And then we can place that in our marked out area very carefully like so. And that's it, and that'll bond, and that's on. Okay, so the next important thing is to make sure you put the depth markers on in the right order. There is quite a clear photograph in the book. I'm using the little lines that are marked on the hull as the bottom position. So the first one we want to put on is the 3. And just a tiny amount of glue. Just make sure the position's correct and it's nice and straight. The kit has been well thought through, thinking about making sure you get those alignments right, so that's really good. Yeah, there we go, that's our first one on. We have at the back end here, we have a butterfly bracket, so we're going to put that on as well. So line that up. There we go. That's grabbed instantly, so that's great. So there you go. It's as simple as that. Just take your time, place it carefully, use as little glue as you can get away with, and that's all there is to it, really. So I'm going to carry on doing this, and then I will come back to you when we're at our next stage, which I think is removing the bulkhead tops from the false deck so that we can install the actual deck. So that will be nice. We will feel like we're starting to see the bits of the ship that are going to remain visible, and stop doing things that get covered up in the end. There we go. Right, I'm going to carry on doing this and then I'll come back to you. So you now should have something that looks like this. The whale's on, our photo etch parts are on, we've got our transom on there like that, and we're looking good. So the next thing we want to be doing is removing these bulkheads. So let's have a look at that. So sometimes this can be a tricky job. Quite often kits have this made out of plywood and it's much harder to break, and you end up sort of trying to saw it part the way through. In this instance, this is fibre board, so should be easier to break, and also there was a cut on the inside that this deck was fitting into, so that gives it a little bit more weakness as well. So we should be able to go in with a pair of mole grips and waggle it at the base and break it off. So we need to remove all of these, and then you can see how easy they're coming off. That's such a simple job to do. I mean, you could probably break it off by hand, but there you go. And then after that, we're going to have to go in and sand these flush so there's nothing getting in the way of the correct sitting of the deck overlay when we put that down. So I'm going to carry on removing these, and then I'll come back to you. Oh, don't do it too far up, it might break where you don't want it to. Oops. Once we've removed all the bulkhead tops, we can go in with a coarse sanding paper and just get them nice and flat. We want to make sure that there's nothing sitting proud of this, because that's going to misshape the deck that we put down afterwards. So take your time, double check everything's nice and flat. Just run your finger over it, you'll be able to feel if it's flat or not, and get it nice and smooth. Don't worry if you've got it broken down under the height of the deck, we don't need to fill it or anything like that. We just need to get it to where we need it to be, which is level with the top of this. It's not difficult to do, it's quite an easy material to sand flush. There we go. So that's looking good. I can still feel some lumps, so this is going to take me a little bit of time, so I'll come back to you when that's done. With all of this sanded smooth, we're now able to start looking at fitting the deck. So the first thing we want to do is just gently sand the nubs off, so we've got a nice smooth edge. And then once you've done that, we want to fit this part here right at the front of the deck. Let me just zoom you in a little bit. So we need to fit that, and we have to be very careful how we do that. I recommend that you do it with a file, and you just take a couple of swipes from one side and then a couple of swipes from the other side. The important thing here is that we keep it centralised. If you take it from just one side, then your deck's not going to be in the centre anymore, and you'll find that you're having to take material off one side and you've got a gap on the other side. So you've got to keep it centralised. There we go. Just those few swipes has made that difference, and that will now go in. So make sure that your slot is nice and straight. This is quite a thin deck, so it's a little bit flimsy. So I'm just making sure everything's nice and straight, and there's nothing there fouling the fit of the deck from the false deck. No, all good. There we go. So that goes in, and just test fit it. Just push it down gently, make sure it fits. Now we are going to have inner bulkhead linings going in, so if you have got a tiny little gap, don't worry about it, we're going to cover it up. What we're looking for is a nice fit. It's not touching anywhere and getting snagged to stop it laying flat. And you can see mine's lying nice and flat right from the off, so I'm happy with that. We've got a good fit around all of these parts here. So using our knife, we can remove these bits on a cutting mat in the same way as we've removed this from its host, and then we can get on with gluing this deck down.